In this presentation, we should look at the links between usul al-fiqh and the maqasid, or the objectives of Sharia. The objectives of Sharia refer to the ends, the purposes, the intents of the Islamic law or the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. In other words, the whole purposes that the Islamic way of life tries to achieve in human society, of course for the benefit of this life and in the hereafter. Just before we look at the Maqasid, or the objectives and purposes of Sharia, the Islamic way of life, it is important we recap an important point, that usul al-fiqh is critical in reducing differences of opinion and ensuring that arbitrary methods of interpretation are not used in the name of ijtihad or juristic reasoning. As we've said before, the field of usul al-fiqh was to regulate ijtihad and make sure that the juristic reasoning, as much as possible, used the same tools and methodologies and principles of extracting rulings that were used by the earliest generation of Muslims, down to the time of the Sahaba, and even some that were used by the Prophet where there was no revelation, and seconded by the Prophet, that were also used among his companions. Usul al-fiqh, therefore, plays a significant role in reducing differences of opinion and identifying at least valid conclusions, or conclusions that were based on valid rules and guidelines of interpretation. However, usul al-fiqh was never the final arbiter of disagreements. Usul al-fiqh could reduce, but it never, as we can see from the existence of differing schools of jurisprudence, usul al-fiqh never resolved many issues that scholars differed on. And so while it is very important, it was not, it is not, and probably will not be a way of resolving all differences of opinion. What scholars found was that the concern for maqasid, the objectives of Sharia, being achieved in a particular context, probably had a much more important role to play in reducing differences of opinion in a particular locality or for a particular time and place, because the objectives of Sharia were more easy to identify both from the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. They were more obvious, and there was a lot of evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah to support the fact that the objectives of Sharia were indeed benefits that were intended for human society. So if we look at the usul al-fiqh as being similar to a map that connects fatwa and fiqh with the Quran and Sunnah, a map that is drawn by scholars, equations used by scholars, the maqasid of Sharia, the objectives of Sharia, become like the compass that direct fiqh and direct communities to identify of existing opinions which of these opinions are more in line, more attuned to the objectives of the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. Traditionally, the subject of the wisdom or the purposes behind revelation, the question of why a particular statement was made in the Quran, why a particular injunction was made, was usually in usul al-fiqh handled when looking at illah, the textual reason for a particular injunction, or looking at the hikmah, the wisdom behind injunctions. Here, these were used for the purpose of qiyas, or analogical reasoning. In other words, the concern for why was not a new invention, but as old as the use of qiyas, as we have already discussed during this the presentation on that topic. What we also find is there was a concern for why when scholars looked into subjects such as istihsan, juristic preference, which tried to achieve the objectives of the text. When scholars were concerned about maslaha or masalih al-mursala, they were concerned about the wisdom behind the injunctions and ensuring benefit to society. When we look at tools like saddu dhariya, the blocking of the means to haram, it is because scholars knew what Sharia was trying to achieve and how to ensure that legal stratagems or abuses of the law did not try and make prohibited what, or make permissible what was actually prohibited. And when we look at other tools like Raf'ul Haraj or Istislah, the removal of hardship, it was because of the understanding scholars had that Sharia was about removing hardship. As we see from the Qawaid of fiqh, of the principle of fiqh, where it says ad-darar yuzal, that hardship must be removed, there was an implicit understanding that removing hardship and bringing about benefit was part of the objective of Sharia. The respect for urf, custom or ada, and even making it a source of law based on the maxim al-ada muhakkama, looking at how the Prophet handled social customs in his region and at his time, that these were all indicants or indicators of the interest Sharia had in identifying and realizing the higher objectives and purposes for which Allah had revealed the Quran and sent His Prophet to achieve in human society.